Adrian, to begin with, tell us your story, from being passionate about CX to now being recognized as a thought leader and expert in this area. How has the journey been for you so far? What has been your why?
First of all, I should say I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a student of this sort of space because I'm always kind of learning. Now, I might know a little bit kind of more than other sort of people, maybe. I might have a different perspective to other people, maybe. But I don't, I think the word expert to me implies that you know kind of like almost everything. And I don't assume that, and it's almost my approach. I'm always interested. I'm curious about what I'm curious about the things that I'm interested in, which is, and in particular with this space, I'm interested in how do we build and develop organizations that produce better outcomes for their people. And what I mean by that, I mean their people in terms of their customers, their employees, their ecosystem of suppliers and contractors and freelancers, their communities, like positive outcomes across it, and including into that investors and so on and everything. So it's almost a bit like, can we just produce better outcomes? How did I get into this? Is I got into this because, well, almost by accident. I was back in sort of 2007, 2008. I could, I haven't left corporate and been working for sort of independently for a few years. I decided I liked the idea of working independently, but I could see that the way the market was developing, and that yes, it's about having a network, but it's also about having a digital footprint. So you can because, and then that means having a website but also like a blog and kind of writing. So then I figured out that actually what we've got to do is we've got to find a way of how developing trust at a distance. So people have got to get to know me and kind of what I think about things, my perspective, at a distance. It's not about having met me, it's about having me kind of like showing them kind of like, here's my ideas, here's what I think, here's kind of, how I approach things. And so I started my own society, and I started writing about just general stuff that got, but that got very boring very quickly. And then I sort of figured out that I needed to write about something that either I wanted to achieve, or I wanted to change, or or something I didn't like. And I figured out that I really don't like bad service. Having built and developed teams and organizations that had sort of customer and employee value at their heart, it always frustrated me that organizations often get in the way of their people doing a good job. And so I thought, well, okay, let me write about service. Let me explore service and what it takes to deliver great service. And so I start at it from a perspective of service, right? Because I think that's what we can do. That's what we can control. And this is the big point, is like people talk about doing customer experience. You can't do customer experience. You can do stuff. And then there's what people experience. Right? That's a massive distinction that many people don't really get. People talk about this customer experience space and kind of like creating customer experiences. You can't create experiences.
And just in that context, how far do you think brands have succeeded or businesses have truly recognized the importance of CX? Because you are discussing helping people. The idea is to ultimately help them, right? To solve a problem. But do you think this is how the companies today, the modern businesses, are looking at CX? Or, still there are like miles to go? Or are we there, somewhere there?
No. I think I think we've still got work to do, and I think the problem is that many people have turned this kind of experience space into its own little industry.
Right.
And it in of itself has probably created its own problems.
Mhm.
Because it create all these big promises and everything else, but actually, ultimately, um, like I said before, it's like you've got to come down to that sort of thing. It's like going, um, make things easier or better for your customers, but in a way that makes sense for the business.
Right, right.
Right? Because if you're not doing the second part,
Mhm.
you're only going to be doing this stuff for a short period of time until your CFO shows up and goes,
Yeah.
where's my ROI on this?
Yeah.
You know, we might like to think that kind of say CFOs are going to come around and go, yeah, rain, make it rain money. It's like, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, if we talk about the role of the customer experience manager within the organization, how misunderstood the role is, what would you say to that?
I sometimes wish that the whole customer experience space would just go away. And the reason being is when people talk about customer experience and it becomes a thing and a team
Yeah.
and this, it's not a thing and a team that's separate to everything else. It's not this disembodied thing. It's not this,
Yeah.
ta-da, we've discovered this new thing that we never knew anything about before. You're like, no,
Mhm.
it's always been there. The companies, there are companies that, companies that are up there that we hold out as being um, the leaders in their space. More often than not, they don't talk about this stuff.
Right.
They don't because it's like it's just part of what they do.
Yes.
It's not separate. It's all woven in and embedded into kind of what they do.
Mhm.
So I think people have to see the idea that it's like if you end up with this customer experience manager type of kind of role, you might need to think about this, for example. You might need to think that actually that role's only ever going to be temporary. You know, in the broader scheme of things. Um, and it all depends where it's going to be aligned kind of to. Is it aligned to sales? Is it aligned to marketing? Is it aligned to operations? Is it aligned to service? What is it aligned sort of
Right.
to? Because ultimately, your role is to two things: figure out how the business can add value to the customers. Figure out how doing that can add value to the business.
Right. Right. So in that case, we are also looking at a lot of silos within an organization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how can the C-level executives actually invest in that and bring about an alignment or harmony? Because as you rightly pointed out, CX should not be seen as a different block altogether, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is where everything comes together and it's part of the big picture we are looking at. So what advice do you have here for the top level management?
Sometimes senior execs are so distant from the front line, the place where the customer interactions are happening. Yeah, and until you kind of reduce that gap, because so here's the thing: it's like the execs might see it as on a spreadsheet or a piece of analysis or a report or a dashboard or whatever it might be. Data informs people. Stories move people, but actual experiences, direct experience, first-hand experience will compel people, right? And so if you think about those sort of things, it's like the executives to go, they get all this data, it's data, right?
Right.
So if you can't get somebody to come to the front line, then sometimes you have to take the stories to them. You tell them stories, and that will kind of move them, possibly emotionally, possibly physically, but it'll move them. But actually, the best thing you can do is get your senior execs as much exposure as you possibly can to the work that's getting done and the problems that people have and the things they hear from customers and what customers are saying themselves. And if they do that and you get first-hand experience of that, That's, I think, where you kind of start to get really with it, because there are companies that do that routinely, that they're connecting their senior execs with the frontline and their people and their customers all the time. And it's undoubtedly the thing that keeps them, that drives insight and drives connection and drives movement and drives kind of initiative and all these different sort of things. And I think that's kind of the thing that people have to do, is you have to help your senior execs understand what's kind of going on.
Yeah.
But they have to want to understand what's going on.
Right. And on that note, again, just adding to what you've already said, highlighted that it's so much more than data, right? It's so much more than numbers, CX. So customer journeys, when we talk about customer journeys, how can contact centers actually contribute towards bringing out the best sort of story about the customer? Because the entire struggle is about getting to know your customer properly, understanding the customer in the right way. So how do you see the role of contact centers in all of this? And do you think they have moved away from that general perception of being recognized as just cost centers, but now they are being seen as a platform of real value?
So people have talked about that sort of stuff for the longest time. However, many people can't get away from the idea that they're still cost centers. I think there was a recent piece of Accenture, I think, global research that said that only 20% of organizations that they surveyed had made that sort of shift. It's a mindset shift. I mean, it's moving away from a cost center to a value center. For me, I think kind of the contact centers are one of these, an incredible jewel in the crown of many, or an incredible jewel in most organizations. They are a mine of data. They are a hub of potential, an opportunity. But it requires people to think differently about them. Now, I think that can change when, because I think the smartest and most progressive marketing people, either marketing directors or chief marketing officers or whatever, already understand this. And they are starting to invest in projects in the contact center space because they understand the amount of data that they have, the potential they have, and how much value they can deliver to kind of them as marketeers, and their ability to build better relationships with their customers. So I think we've still got a long way to go. There's still a huge amount of potential. And people that do make that switch, they just do better, grow faster, all these different sort of things.
Right.
But it is, again, it becomes that sort of thing. It's a mindset shift, but it becomes a financial and accounting sort of question, which, so you end up having to make the business case, because otherwise the reality with kind of, with that, the whole service sort of space, despite all the investment in self-service sort of technologies, phone and email and live chat, live, semi-live contact with people is still an important service and support channel, right, or set of channels. And that requires people, and people are expensive,
Right.
relatively, right? And so you have to figure out kind of like, you have to make that sort of the business case for why you want to take a different approach to a contact center, and how you kind of see it as an investment rather than just as a cost that to be trimmed or managed or cut.
And Adrian, just to conclude our entire conversation, what would you say are some of the key trends that brands should watch out for when they're trying to elevate their customer experiences to the next level? And what is it that they simply cannot afford to miss out on.
Brands need to ask themselves, what is the vision that they have for the experience that they want to deliver? And I don't mean kind of like a one line sort of thing. I mean, tell me a story about the experience that you want your customer to have. Because until you get to that kind of point, then you don't really understand it. And it means that, because many people don't have this in place. Because when I've asked this kind of question of many people, they don't have this compelling kind of vision, which is filled out full of stories around what they want to kind of do. And therefore you end up with all this. I talked about it with Ari Weinsweg on my latest kind of podcast. Then you talk about this thing around, you end up getting all these higgledy-piggledy services, and we don't understand kind of why. It's because we don't understand what we're trying to build. If you don't understand what you're trying to build, what you're aiming for, and then what your strategy is to try and achieve that, then you end up with this mishmash stuff. You end up being kind of reactive to the next big thing, or this or that or the other, and you're like, rather than staying true and staying, the course. And so I would say get clear on what that vision is, but dig into it in terms of and I don't want you to kind of come up with a statement which goes, we want it to create this kind of digital, omni-channel, frictionless kind of AI-enabled blah, 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 blah. It's just like, it's absolute nonsense. Yeah. They're just a bunch of buzzwords. Tell me the story about what your customer currently kind of gets and what you would like them to get, and what's the difference between here and here, and tell me how you're going to achieve that.
Right.
And how that makes sense for the business. Mm-hmm. When you do that, then you're going to have a clear idea about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. It'll also help you understand kind of like, it'll show you that you need to make difficult choices too. No to that, yes to that, no to that, no to that. You'll end up saying no to more things than not. So I think that's really important. The second thing really important is that brands need to understand that, well, they don't understand this, but they need to kind of get real with the whole sort of thing, is that, yes, they want to deliver a personalized experience. Customers want that too, but brands need to get past the idea that creating a personalized experience does not mean that you have to sell more stuff to somebody. It means, giving customers kind of what they want. Now, that might not mean more stuff. It might just be know me, hear me, understand me, respect me, help me when you can.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you do that, I'm going to think you're brilliant. Well, you have to literally going to go and ask customers, tell us what you want.
Yes.
Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, tell us what you prefer, tell us kind of all these different things. Right? And then you could pull that in to the zero party data on top of the first party data, and then you can start to think about how I can create these kind of personalized, sort of the really personalized experiences.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you're like going, okay, then you're in good shape. Right.
Like right in the beginning of this conversation, you said that I cannot say what your experience of this interview will look like, right? Right after the interview, when I shut down my laptop, things that I would carry home with me in that sense, like, this is what Adrian highlighted. I really liked this idea. This is what I'm taking along with me from this conversation. And in a sense, I'm trying to, compare it with the customer experience. Like, I would not remember how and why I bought that product, but I will remember how that person made me feel who was selling the product to me.
You're absolutely right. People will seldom remember what you did or what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel.
How you made them feel, yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's such wisdom in that idea, because it's true. And again, it becomes that sort of thing. It's like, it's all about, you can't necessarily you will feel differently about different sort of things, but you can't necessarily compare a, I don't know, a local shop with a luxury
Yeah.
hotel sort of thing, because it's all about being appropriate, right? In that sort of time and kind of relative to what you're trying to offer. But I think the how you make somebody kind of feel is absolutely important. And people just kind of, you know, more often than not, they sort of want, they're not, we're not complicated. We complicate things, you know. We want to be heard. We want to be respected. We want to be valued. We want to be helped where we need to. We don't want to be ripped off. That's, you know, if you know, those are some things, but if you, I think if you try and get those, most of those things kind of right, then you're not going to be doing far wrong.